we've got joining us this morning here on Montana Talks. He's not only an expert on that part of the world. He grew up in Iran, but he's also a University of Montana professor who has been one of the most popular professors at the University of Montana. Has headed up their Central and Southwest Asia Studies program at the University of Montana. Dr. Mehrdad Kia, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Aaron. Good morning to you and all your listeners. It's wonderful being with you again.
Yeah, good morning and Happy New Year to you. Before we take a quick break here in just a couple of minutes, I want to just get your initial reaction. What was your reaction when you not only heard that Qassem Soleimani had been taken out, but that the president said, yes, he ordered the strike?
Well, the United States Armed Forces has done a favor to not only the Iranian people, but also to the entire region. Qassem Soleimani's hands were stained with the blood of, as you mentioned correctly, hundreds of U.S. servicemen in Iraq, and the mayhem he wreaked on that country, but also tens of thousands of Iranians who came to the streets, as you mentioned, demanding democracy and rule of law in their country. This is as late as last November, just a couple months ago, when the regime kicked out all foreign media and massacred nearly 1,500 protesters. I think the numbers are probably much higher, but those are the numbers so far that we have.
Dr. Mehrdad Kia with the University of Montana's Central and Southwest Asian Studies program, now with us here on Montana Talks. And Dr. Kia, thanks again for joining us this morning. I know you still talk with friends back on the ground in Iran. What's their reaction, and what do you think is the reaction from a majority of the Iranians to this news?
Yes, and I want to take this opportunity to remind your listeners about one fundamental fact. Today, in the next few days, they will see numerous images of Iran where people are demonstrating in mourning about the death of Soleimani. This will be used as an opportunity for the regime in Tehran to rally its supporters and demonstrate to the world that it is not an unpopular, hated, and despised regime in the eyes of majority of Iranians. That's why they invited CNN, that's why they invited MSNBC and other channels to come to Iran, whereas in November they had kicked them all out because they were planning to do something very different, which is to destroy any opposition to the regime. So what you see is pre-staged demonstrations among government supporters. And look, Iran with an 85 million population can easily bring 500,000, a million of people belonging to the regime, revolutionary guards, intelligence officers, all sorts of people who are paid by the government to come and demonstrate. So what you see is a staged, scene by the regime. The majority of the Iranians have expressed their feelings repeatedly, starting in 2009, then in 2017, 2018, then again in November 2019, where millions of Iranians came out and denounced this regime for its fascistic policies, for its repressive policies. And in November of 2019, how did the regime respond? It opened fire on its own people with order to shoot either the heart or the head of the demonstrators. That's why in 3 days you had over 1,500 people killed by the regime's goons and thugs and paramilitary units. So this is a regime which has been merciless, brutal, and Qassem Soleimani being the head of the Quds forces. Quds means Jerusalem, which gives you a sense of what Qassem Soleimani was all about. He was the head of Iran's military intelligence forces in the region, so Iran could influence and expand its power in Lebanon, in Syria, where they have kept Bashar al-Assad's regime in power, in Iraq, in Yemen, where they have fomented a civil war, and on, as well as in Afghanistan, by the way, where they have contacted and they have established support for Taliban of all groups. And this is what this man was doing. And I have to tell you, what I am hearing is that a lot of Iranians who cannot go to the streets and in fact demonstrate openly and freely are actually very, very happy with the elimination of a person who only brought death and destruction to their country and the region.
So do you think this emboldens the protesters who've already been taken to the streets, even in the face of death penalty facing protesters in Iran? Does this embolden those protesters in their efforts to seek regime change inside of Iran?
Yeah, I think what it does is that the regime is trying to use this opportunity to take the body of Soleimani and Mahdi al-Muhandis, the head of the Hashd al-Shabi, the mercenary group backed and financed and owned by Iran inside Iraq. They are taking these bodies to city after city to rally support for the government and to remind the opposition within Iran and outside Iran that they are not as unpopular as everybody thought they were.
Pleased to be joined this morning here by Dr. Mehrdad Kia from the University of Montana. And Dr. Kia, before the break, you were talking about how the Iranians, they kicked all the foreign media out of Iran, and then they slaughtered their own people that were protesting the regime. But now, all of a sudden, now that they want to carefully orchestrate the propaganda coming out of Iran with the funeral of Soleimani, you mentioned how now they're allowing the foreign media to cover this, to kind of feed into their propaganda. What do you think the real reaction is inside of Iran?
I think the situation has basically polarized the tensions between the regime and the society as a whole. The regime wants to use this death as an opportunity to demonstrate and to organize some support for its survival. I think the majority of Iranians know better by now, and they know that this is just a propaganda effort. And in the next few days, as the fever of this event subsides, you will see once again the reality. The reality is Iran is facing massive unemployment, massive inflation, to the point that some of the prices, if I mention these prices, your listeners would not even believe. One egg, $5. These are the kind of prices we are talking about. A pound of chicken, $45. These are the kinds of things. Devaluation of Iranian currency. At the time of the revolution, Aaron, you had a currency where $1 was equivalent to 7 Iranian tuman. That's the Iranian currency, tuman. 1 to 7. Now it's 1 to 14,000, which gives you a sense that it's a bankrupt economy. It's a sanctioned economy. The Iranians want relief from these sanctions, and the Iranians want to have a normal relationship with the rest of the world. There was a time when you could have an Iranian passport and travel to numerous countries in the world without a visa. Now, it's the most feared and the most hated passport in the world. They know all of these facts, and they know that this regime's survival will only prolong their suffering. So it doesn't matter what they do in the next few days, trying to demonstrate in support of the regime and try to rally some support among their, diminishing support base. But the reality is not going to change. What I am worried about, let me say this and use this opportunity, are threefold. One, that we do not show unity behind this foreign policy, and we start attacking one another and not focus, on the issue at hand.
Which is already happening, frankly. Frankly,
exactly.
It's already becoming politicized.
Very worried about. That is, we go after each other, and in the process, of course, we undermine a foreign policy which is finally putting its focus on the right target. For all these decades, as you know very well, we have been appeasing Iran, and it started back in presidency of President Carter. We went all the way to the nuclear deal, where we actually provided this regime with billions of dollars to buy its silence. And what happened? We gave them billions of dollars, and they went. The first $11 billion that the United States handed, the Obama administration handed, was used by Khamenei and his family and cohorts to buy real estate in United Kingdom, in England, right? And the rest of it was used to buy military hardware from China and Russia. And that military hardware was distributed among the supporters of the regime, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza Strip, the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, so it could butcher more Syrians. Hundreds of thousands were killed.
Yeah, they used the money that our government sent them, the plane load of cash, the billions of dollars, and instead of using it to help their own people, they used it to attack American interests and to attack other friends in the region. And in fact, on a lighter note, I saw one of my fellow veteran friends in Missoula had a funny thing that he shared on Facebook. He said, wait a minute, so because I saw too that Khamenei apparently put a price tag out for Trump's head, for President Trump's head, $80 million. And this friend in Missoula joked, he said, wait a minute, we sent them $150 billion in cash on this airplane, and they're offering $80 million for Trump's head. It's like, not only are they evil, they're cheapskates too.
And these are all, symbolic gestures of, defiance and so on and so forth. I have to tell you that, this policy of appeasing a fascistic regime, which has only suppressed its own people and has denied them their democratic aspirations, and has also wreaked havoc in the region, destabilizing Lebanon, destabilizing Syria, destabilizing Iraq, destabilizing Yemen, destabilizing the Persian Gulf region. Remember, they shot down a U.S. drone over Persian Gulf. Remember, they bombed and they tried to hijack oil tankers back in summer of 2019. All this behavior.
Well, even after the plane load of cash and the Iranian nuclear deal, remember they held American sailors held hostage.
Can you imagine? We tried to appease them, and in return, they in fact construed this language of peace and compromise as a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
The regime in Tehran only understands the language of power. That is very unfortunate, but that's the truth. And that's what I have been saying, that and the Iranian people will tell you that the only way to deal with this regime is to stand up to it.
And that's exactly what President Trump did last week. And then now the news reports are that the Ayatollah Khamenei is openly weeping over the casket of Soleimani, and then this other Hezbollah terrorist who was killed in that attack last week as well. Dr. Mehrdad Kia from the University of Montana Central and Southwest Asia Studies program here with us. He grew up in Iran, and he still talks with friends back in Iran. He's the expert in that region, and he's right here in our backyard here in Montana. Been one of the most popular professors at the University of Montana for several years. We're taking your phone calls as well. If you want to jump in on the conversation with a question or a comment, call 406-294-0970. Dr. Kia, we did have a question from Elena in Phillipsburg. She says, seeing some of these news reports like on NPR and some other outlets where they kind of refer to Soleimani as being like an Iranian national hero. What did he do that made him a national hero, or at least that to some, because obviously he's a national evil but to many in Iran, but how is he heroic to some in Iran?
Yeah, so this is what is so troubling. That is, U.S. media outlets, and I had to endure listening to Fareed Zakaria on CNN referring to Qassem Soleimani, the arch-terrorist, as the most revered military leader in Iran. This is not only misinformation, but this is an insult to hundreds of thousands of Iranians who have lost their loved ones in the prison cells of this regime. What he is famous for is that the Quds force, the Jerusalem force, Quds, as I mentioned, means Jerusalem, is the outer units, the non-national units of Iran in the region, which means he was indeed the foreign policy maker of Iran. You know, there was this fellow, Javad Zarif, the foreign minister who negotiated with John Kerry the nuclear deal. Zarif is the civilian face of the regime. Qassem Soleimani was the military intelligence face of the regime. Quds Force is really the foreign policy brain center for the regime, how to intimidate the opponents of the regime in the region and how to perpetuate its interest and expand Iran's influence